Okay, so over the during the break there between videos, we were talking briefly about these tags. I wanted to make sure and express this point. I always try to, I like to at different places. Here in the HTML, there's the body tag, which has to be there. And then inside of that is, I put a main tag that wraps everything. And the reason for doing that is control. The body tag has to be there. So by the standards, everything should go inside the body tag. But part of that having to be there is we lose some of the control over it. And that's one of the things about programming is people usually tend towards programming because we like to control things, right? We want control over what the computer's doing. And that's a personality trait that leads to the choice to being a programmer. So having this overarching tag that we don't have any control over is something a lot of programmers don't like because they want control over everything, or we want control over everything. So to get some control back is a tag inside of the body that we do have full control over. So that way the body just sits there in the background, it does all its stuff, and we don't have to worry about it. It is completely filled up by a tag that we do have full control over. And that is a very common personality trait that leads to decisions to learn computer programming, is that liking to have control over things. And I always try to specify that at least once every class, because that's an important aspect, because also along with computer programming is most software these days are really big projects that we're going to be working on as part of a team, right? More than one person can reasonably do. So there's going to be a team working together, a team of computer programmers. And like I just said, computer programmers are people that like control. That's a personality trait that leads to the decision to be a computer programmer. You put those things together, and that means you're on a team full of people that like control, a team of control freaks. So make sure you keep that in mind when you're out there working in the field on a big team, because if everybody on the team has that personality trait that they like control, there's probably going to be a little bit of head bunting, right? Everybody can't have control, so it's going to trigger that personality trait somewhere. I just wanted to mention that because it was conversation over the break mentioned the putting things just in the body or just in the main. In the long run, it is really the exact same thing. In this case, there's no difference whatsoever because the main is nowhere in the style sheet, and there's no scripting going on. So there's absolutely no difference here. It's just a control thing. Completely fill the body up with a tag that we do have full control over. And a lot of programmers tend to do that just to get back that control that we don't have with the body tag, the automatic stuff that happens in the background with the body tag. Just wanted to express that point, and something to keep in mind is when you're working on a team of programmers, all of them became programmers because of that liking to control things somewhere in the personality. Okay, so we looked at floating before the break, and yeah, that's the one I use most often. Oops, something in the chat room. I can't get to the button. There it is. Oh yeah, we can put any tag we want in between there. We could move this header out. The question popped up in the chat room. Can there be a tag between there? Yeah. Once we're inside of the body, we can put the tags any way we want. So if I move the header outside of that main and hit reload, there's no difference in the page at all. So the order is just for us. So that one is just a wrapper, something to wrap all of our stuff and keep it contained. So an extra layer. It's like a container that's wrapped in with wrapping paper around it or something. So it's nicely enclosed. But a lot of it is up to our choice how those things go. And yeah, all of these we're using percentages, but we could use any size we want, any of the sizing things. So we could do like 12 elements wide on that one, and 22 elements wide on that one. I'm just going to take this one off here. Don't specify any width for the middle one, and then they just kind of whatever it takes to make them all fit. So any of the sizing things we've seen already will work with that. When floating, I tend to go with percentages because that makes it, I find that a lot easier to do the math for. Think about some percentage or fraction of the screen. But floating isn't the only thing we can do. We also have ways that we could take a lot more control over this stuff. So I'm going to make a new CSS. So I'm going to go up here and hit Save As to make a copy. I'm going to call this fixed.css. And I guess for now, I'm just going to remove all of these properties. Oh, wait, not the background colors. I'll probably leave that. I'll remove all the floating properties. So the colors are okay. Oh, and guys, I'm deleting this, noticing I did not put those in the same order every time. On some of them, the float was last, and on others, the float was first. So the order doesn't really matter for those properties, if you hadn't noticed that. Take that out, save that, and I will change the link to that new CSS sheet. It's going to go to fixed. Now it should be back to the original thing, yeah. So kind of the original one, but we need ways to position the stuff around the screen. I guess I'll do this first. Well, I called that fixed, which is a keyword, so I should probably do something. I'm going to duplicate a whole bunch of paragraphs so that it's long enough to scroll. There we go. And on the header tag, maybe I always want that header showing. Right here, it's random words, but maybe there's a common thing for a header is going to be a logo. So probably it might be a good idea to always keep the logo showing on the page. And to do that, we can fill the position attribute with the value fixed. So, well, it made it small, just kind of barely fit through the words, but you'll notice those are behind that now. As I scroll, it always stays in this, no matter what else is going on the page, that part stays in the same spot.
So you could also do that with no background, make it like a floating watermark.
Yes, yes. And right now it's putting it in front of everything. So I'll also use this to show this, the Z index. That's, like, if we think of the screen, the graphics, it's like graphing the XY coordinates. We also have a Z coordinate, which is in, like in and out of the screen, towards us and away from us. So if we put that as Z, I don't know, +5, reload it, it's towards us, and a negative, you can see when I made that negative, it went behind the stuff below it. So by default, all the Z indexes are going to be 0. They're all at the same level, or really the order that we put them in. The first thing.
I really like that. Okay, so with doing that, you could do that with also an image then. So let's just say, for instance, I want to keep one image and make the page like everything, like when they go to this one section, okay, I brought them here with this photo, and then that photo, once they get to the new link or the new page, is going to stay the background by doing making it fixed. And then also then the sections I can okay.
Yes, so that's stuff to do at lab time here in Relative. That's why I want to make sure there's lots of lab time, because there's a bunch of stuff to play around with today. Plus some of the stuff we've already seen, right? There's still more you could experiment with. One thing, the Z index here, this will only work if there is also a position attribute. If you don't use the position property, then the Z index won't do anything. So like if it's fixed, or the next two we're getting ready to see, absolute or relative, you have to have those on there. And then Z index, negative numbers are away from us, so behind things, and positive numbers are towards us, so in front of things. So that's the Z index and position.
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry.
So as long as if you're using the position property, you can set the Z index to say where it's at, with negative numbers being behind other stuff, and positive numbers are like coming out of the screen in front of other stuff. So positive in front, negative behind.
Okay, and as far as those numbers, they're only relative to each other. So like if I had a bunch of different, if I would do something really weird and I had pictures that got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and I wanted the smallest one up front, I'd make sure it had the highest Z index.
Yes.
And then they would layer behind each other. So I can
exactly.
Tiv's brain's probably going to explode on that one, because
you don't even know.
Because I know what you're thinking, but I mean I don't think I would try to do that because I'm not artsy enough. I'm gonna have to grab my daughter-in-law who is artsy to help me with some of that.
We'll give it a try with like a random picture just to see what it looks like.
Yeah, let's play with that.
Notice there's no units. And
right, yeah, because so they're relative to each other. So
numbers without units.
Somebody with something with a Z index of -10 will be behind something with a Z index of -5 in the same style sheet.
Yes.
Or in the same HTML world.
Yes.
Because I could put this in line if I wanted to, couldn't I? In part, if I wanted one piece of it to.
Oh yeah, style.
Yeah, if I put a style, I mean, a style attribute's a style attribute. It's just which one it reads first and last.
Yeah.
But
so
the idea is
inline will be the very last thing. Inline overrides everything else.
But if I have an inline of Z index is -10, if in my style sheet my highest or my smallest one is -5, inline that'll just put it behind the -5 guys because it's -10.
Yes.
So it's all relative. I could use -362 if I wanted to.
Exactly. You can go up by hundreds or thousands, very big numbers until you get up to probably 2 to the 32nd power.
Well, I'm getting silly here, but the idea is that it's a relative value, not a, oh, gee, if I want it to look like it's further back in the page, I give it a -12 versus a -10.
Yeah. Yeah, right now,
I just want to establish that part about them.
Okay. If you pass 2 to the 32nd power, you risk an overflow. Although Google has already told programmers to stop using 32-bit processing. Just do everything 64-bit now.
Oh,
so in most machines, you have to get to, as long as that number is less than positive or negative 2 to the 64th power.
I mean, to me,
which is a very big number.
-26 is a big number for a Z, and I mean for this, because I can't imagine I have enough layers to want to go that far.
Yeah.
Because you just have to have enough discrete Z. You just have to have enough discrete Z numbers to hit your layers.
Yeah.
Because this is how you layer front to back.
Yep.
Okay.
So the next one, the next thing, along with fixed, it uses that same attribute, the position attribute, and it's where do we put it? Where's the index? I'll do relative first. So position, well, I'll leave it off the header then. For the first section, I'll put a position and I'll set the position up relative. And then we need more information with that. Instead of relative, we need to know where it's relative to. So like left, maybe 12 pixels from the left, and top 5 EM. So it's relative to the thing before it. So before this first section is where the header was. So it's going to be 5 elements below the header and then 12 pixels from the left of the screen.
And the EMs is just, I just imagine what my normal font letter looks like, the biggest one, like an M or W. And so if my top is 5 EM, it's like I stack 5 capital W's on top of each other.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so I'm seeing this. I kind of figured this out, but so for top to bottom, it's how tall is my biggest letter, and the other one is how wide is my biggest letter. So an M depends on because I don't know, is a W wider than it is tall, or is it square?
It's not square. The square is a monotype, and right now it's Times New Roman font. So on my machine, it's not square. Depending on what your default.
So that's all relative to font. Yes. So an EM is going to be different, like on Arial narrow. An EM side to side on Arial narrow isn't squat. But
or Arial monotype. Monotype would be square. Every letter is the same. Right. So then it wouldn't even be an M. It
would be anything. But then if I have a wide font, then my EMs horizontally are going to be a lot bigger space than my vertical ones because I've got a wide font.
Yeah, and then that's when we size things with EMs. We're sizing things based off the data on the page. So it's always, it lines up with itself. That's why it's a good way to size things.
So that's where EMs come in handy. Well, see, this is
stuff. If we use pixels and points, it's very specific. So if somebody's got like zooms in or out, it's going to change things.
Right.
So this is
that gives better clarity to why would you use one versus the other. Which is not very clear in the text. The text is like crap when it comes to that. You ought to write the text, Chris.
Yeah,
you make a lot of.
It comes down to what you want it based off of. So like a point that's another traditional inch that is an actual measurement. It's 172 points in an inch, so 1/72 of an inch. So it's always going to be exactly the same based off hitting the print button when it prints out on a 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper.
Right.
When a point would be exactly the same. So if you always want it to look exactly the same on the printed page, then you would want to use points.
Okay, so points are good. Okay, so just to make clear,
points are an exact size, and pixels are kind of exact sizes as well.
Okay, except points work with printed material, and pixels work with screens.
Yeah, so think of it that way. Points and pixels, those are your exact sizes, whereas EMs and percents, those are your relative sizes. Because if you change the font size, right, if you go from a 12-point font to a 16-point font, your EMs get bigger, but your pixels wouldn't.
Right. Of course, my print gets bigger too. So if my margins are relative to my printed values, then I use EMs. And if it should be relative to something that's sized in pixels like pictures, then I might use pixels.
Yes. Yes. So back to the relative thing. So here we're positioning things relative. So this first one is so far down below the previous thing and so far over from the previous thing. And we have a right and a bottom as well, but really we just need two to position it. Because if we go two ways on that flat surface, that gets us the corner that everything else can be based off of. So whether you want the top and the left or the bottom and the right, just any two sides, so two perpendicular sides, you know, doing relative top and bottom wouldn't really help to position things. If you got like off the side of the screen and so far from the top, you can set where it is relative to the previous thing. That'll make more sense here in just a second. I set the width here to.
So that was relative. So when we said relative, that was relative to the last thing that we placed.
Yes. So it's relative to the header.
To the header. So if the header somehow if the header somehow gets bigger because we add some more junk to it, then that's gonna it's gonna have that same amount of space until the next thing hits.
Yes. So here, I'll set this middle section to 34 pixels. So it's nice and narrow. Right now, it's not really doing anything.
Right.
Because it's behind it, but you can set the position relative to that on that as well.
So if I go, so it's reading the page, you know, it's reading the page, boom, 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 boom. So the next piece it comes to in the HTML, well, it's relative to the last thing I read, whatever that is in the HTML.
Yeah. So now it's relative.
So if I comment out in HTML that first section, then that moves up. Then suddenly that second section becomes relative to the header, which is still there.
Yes. And right now the section doesn't have any sort of relative.
Well, it will in a second. It will in a second.
It changed the Z index because it comes later, so it's on top. But if I do say left, I don't know, 12 pixels, I'll do 12 points this time. Try to mix the different sizes. Notice that it's 12 points over from the previous one.
Right, but it's still, since there's no top and bottom, it still sits where it sits.
And notice it's where it starts. It's 12 points over from where that previous one started, not where it ends.
Right.
So if you need to move it over, and then obviously, if we wanted to line up, you know, we couldn't go below it. So if I do 12 pixels below it, that's going to be down quite a bit.
Wait a minute. Now that's down, but that top is 12 pixels from the top.
From where it originally tried to start.
From where it originally tried to start.
Yes. So relative to the left side, but when I didn't have any numbers for relative, the browser wanted to put it right there.
Right.
So if we bring it over, so from the left.
Okay. And the browser, wait a minute. And the browser put it there because why?
That's where it thought it went. It knows it's after that thing.
It's okay. So it knows it's after the first section.
It put it there because if I cut this out, if I take that out,
right,
that's where it went.
Right.
If the thing above it doesn't have any style rules, this is where it goes.
How do
can you undo that real quick? Can you undo what you? Yep.
So if I put that in there, now there's style rules above it, and it's still in approximately the same position.
Okay.
It moves slightly because one of the style rules above it had that huge margin.
So how would we know where it would want to put it?
At this point, you go with trial and error. The cascading, it cascades. So it starts data, it reads all the property rules and then applies them in a cascading style.
Right.
So it starts
Okay,
there and just
so it sounds like
flows down like waterfall.
it sounds like if you do
But that's
relative.
hard to predict. So trial and error, realistically.
So is that why some of the relative stuff can be kind of flaky? I mean, this looks flaky to me. I mean, because if I want to set up a page, I want to know where it is, either by percents. Okay, it's going to go.
Yeah, so like this is 12 EM wides plus 12 pixels. So we could do the math. That's 12 elements, 12 pixels. It's probably a 12-point font, so that'd be like 8 points. So one extra element. So if I make this 13 EM, it should be almost past it. Yeah. So
okay, so you were guessing. So if I knew what the width was in EMs.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't a guess. So it's 12 letters wide.
Right.
Plus another 12 pixels. And it's a 12-point font.
Which is about one more EM.
Yeah. And yeah. Well, I'm going to do the math on the screen.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, this is important because if we're trying to lay this mess out and not throw our hands up and say this is screwed up.
Yeah. So this part I knew was 12 letters wide.
Right. And EM's a letter. Big letter.
And then I had an extra 12 pixels, which the default is, I know the default is 12-point font. The default on Chrome, if you don't ever change it, is Times New Roman 12-point font. Just like all the style rules, right? So there's 1.5 pixels per point. So 12 pixels is 8 points. So in the 12-point font that is not monotyped, it's 12 points tall. So I assumed 8 points is one letter.
Right.
One letter or one EM.
Right.
So then that means that whole thing is 13 EM wide.
Right.
So that's where that math came from. It wasn't just a guess. I added up what it is.
Well, yeah, because you knew how to do that, and the rest of us are like, what did you just do?
I did it to show you that. Does that make sense? Does everybody see how I got there?
It makes perfect sense now, but reading the textbook, you'd never get that.
And it can be tricky, right? So it takes some trial and error because now, because of that original starting position, if I want those to line up like columns, I'm going to have to do some trial and error. I guess I could look here at the screen. It looks like it's about the middle of this line. So there's 1, 2, 3 lines above it. So I could go -3 EM and see if that lines up.
Oh.
But really, it's trial and error.
Because I can do negatives to slide things around.
Oh, probably should have went 4. I didn't account for that space.
Well, that was okay. Now, if I try this on a different browser, I might get something different.
It depends. What I'm doing right here with the EM would be exactly the same on a different browser.
Oh, okay. Well, bang, you hit it right pretty as close as you're going to hit it.
What would be an example of what would be the difference on how it would look different on something like Chrome or?
If pixels might be slightly different, little changes. I could open this with Edge and see what it looks like. This one should.
This ought to be good.
That's why you always want to check.
Okay, now, how about for those of us who don't have, I mean, I've got Edge and I've got Chrome. If I really wanted to play with my computer in the basement, which I really don't want to, I guess I could get Safari.
Yeah.
But I don't want to screw that computer up because it does important stuff for me. So,
so that one looks the same, right?
Yeah, pretty close. Yep.
Yeah, slight differences, but they're attributable to the what we would expect in the different browsers.
Okay.
So why are the how come the S's are not in with the
Oh,
background?
because it's too wide. I didn't adjust the word wrapping, so I could adjust word wrapping so that it would break in the middle of a word, but by a default, it can only wrap at the end of a word.
Okay.
And I didn't leave enough space there for that
So
word.
the word just kind of hangs over.
Yeah, so if I
okay,
change
now,
that to like
so
67 pixels, yeah.
okay.
So yeah,
Okay.
it couldn't do any word wrapping on one letter. You have to change that in the CSS.
Yeah. Remind.
We'll see that at some point.
I don't want to bring this up yet because I don't know if you're going to get to it, but remind me when we're done for me to ask you a question, because I've looked ahead at the homework and I had one thing that was kind of weird that acted really screwy, and I checked everything and found all my errors, and there's one thing that didn't make any sense.
What was it? We can go ahead and go over it.
Okay, with the buttons. Okay, on the homework, we're supposed to have navigation buttons on the left.
Uh-huh.
If I did the box sizing border box command like they told me to, my home button was fine, and the rest of my buttons, my words kept running out of the buttons. When I took the border box thing out, I commented it out, it looked right. And then for a while after I put it back in, it would look right. Then it would figure it out. Nope, you can't have that. So my buttons on my homework are totally screwed up, and it's almost like what you were seeing in that box.
So whenever situations like that happen, there's some overflow happening. What you want to do is open the inspector and hover over things, or put a border on every single thing, but hover over it and see where it's going. Because notice when I hover over the section, it shows it going all the way across.
I followed their instructions to the letter, as far as I can tell. I'll go back and look at it again, make sure I didn't make a boo-boo.
So actually,
it doesn't come out straight.
Yeah, this first section is affecting the second section. So you can see where it goes all the way across behind it.
Yeah.
So some properties from that are going to affect that. So you'll go over to the elements and just hover over things to see what overlaps onto other stuff.
Okay, so when I hover on that first section and all that pink stuff goes all the way across.
Yeah.
What is that? What is that extra pink telling me, or whatever color that is?
Pink is the margin.
Oh, okay. So that's the margin.
Yes.
And basically,
the blue is the content, and the pink is the margin.
Okay. And since I told it how wide it was, it gave that, and everything that wasn't part of that width is margin.
So for that margin right there, if I wanted to make the margin end have, at the center of the page, I could embed a video to the right of it. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. You can fit there. The margin just is how far this thing, since we're in relative positioning, the margin just says how far this section starts from the left of the page. If something else fits there, or even if it doesn't fit, it would slide in behind it. We're getting ready to look at some more stuff. So over here, I scrolled down. There's the color coding for what these things are.
I get it.
The margin, the border is orange, the content's green. Yeah, so you can see the different, that's the color coding for what you're looking at there.
Since we didn't specify padding, that didn't show up, and okay, I get you.
Yeah, the padding got shut off.
Right.
So by default, like the header still has padding just because it tries to fill up the whole thing.
Because the header, the heading, an H1 heading has built-in padding.
Yes.
That I do not specify.
Yeah, so if I add some padding.
Now, if I do an H1, but then I specify in my H1 element, I specify a certain amount of padding, that'll change that padding, won't it?
Yes. Yes.
It'll override the default.
Yes. Because like in the paragraphs here, it tried to completely get rid of the padding as soon as we did other stuff. It's like, oh, it's being customized. They don't want padding at all. So we got rid of that default before we even said anything about padding.
Right.
But we can put it in there. You can see we can put it in there. It changes everything.
Yeah.
And the relative positioning, really, you kind of want to make little adjustments. What's that? Oh, I have to save it. Save those changes, then reload it. There we go. And there's ways to predict it, but it gets a little tricky to predict because you have to check all that overflow and know what's going on, and then consider the order that it cascades from top elements to the children. So prediction gets hard. It's a lot quicker and more efficient just to trial and error. Do some rudimentary math and then make little adjustments is really the most feasible way to do it.
So there's a lot of art to this.
Yes.
To go along with science.
Yeah, that's what the lab time's for, to practice that. Yeah, we can do the math, we can do the prediction. It's a machine. It does. We can exactly predict what that machine's going to do. But with cascading style sheets, because of the cascading, so the idea is everything on this web page needs to know about everything else on the web page, right? This section down here can't be where it's at, or if there were buttons or something, couldn't do their button clicking thing unless they knew what was going on with the header, if they knew where the header was. So everything on the web page needs to know what everything else is about. This is why it took so long to make a standard. So for a long, long time, there was a debate on the best way to inform stuff, because the most important is the things above it need to know, or it needs to know about the things above it. So one thought was bubbling, where this sends information back to the top. It starts at the element that's affected and bubbles its way back up to the top.
Have you shown us bubbling? I feel like that was the first time I heard that. Okay.
It doesn't really show up anymore. That was one side of the debate. This is like from 1990 to 2015. This is why it took so long to get a standard. Because what bubbles up to the top, or cascading starts at the top and goes down like a waterfall. You can think of a cascading waterfall. So it starts at the top and just takes information about every tag as it passes, and that way everything finds out about it on the way down.
Well,
this is all this is all background inside the CPU electrical engineering thing. The debate was over efficiency. What was the best way to do that? And then that debate went on for so long that the equipment got better and it was no longer an issue. The HTML standard does both. So if I put a style on this paragraph right here, it bubbles up to the top and then cascades down to confirm. So the debate went on for so long that it was no longer an issue over which one would be better, because they have different, it's not a clear-cut argument of efficiency either. Each has different advantages and disadvantages. So that's why they couldn't ever settle on something. And then the equipment, like the size of our CPUs got so big and so fast that it was no longer an issue. Like, yeah, whatever, just send it both ways. And that's where that's where it was when it was finally standardized. But because of all those, and it's a machine, we could use that information to predict what this stuff's going to do, and do all the math with the mixes of sizings and other things.
Then that standardization ended up being what the reason why I see less and less of this browser is not supported. Does not support.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, that's why they were so desperate to get a standardization for so long. Because we had to do different things for different browsers, and it made it very, very difficult. But now there is a standard, and so technically we can predict that, but it takes some complicated math to predict it. So it really just do some rough math to get a basic idea, kind of like I did on that equation there. It's like, okay, I think this is going to be about 13 letters wide. So then I just started there and make adjustments. So it's more of a trial and error than actual prediction, because the prediction is very, very complicated. But that's the relative positioning. And we can do the same thing on the third one. Does that make sense? It positions relative to things. Might as well do that. On this third one, need something that'll fit. So with maybe 20%. That way it fits in there. Again, position, make it relative. And on the left, how far, anybody have any guesses on how far we should start on the left to try to get 3 columns here? Oh, you're muted, Div.
Oh, sorry. No, I meant for to be. I was just looking at, okay, so you did 13 EM the first time. So we
13.
need at least, we need to add, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe add 10. So maybe, I mean, 25 should definitely do. Are you talking about width?
Width. So it's 67 pixels. And if it's a Pro Point font, we can assume about square. So let's say 9 pixels wide. So I think 63 would be the closest, right?
Let's see. I'm just
Which would
now
be-
getting that left and right, left thing, so I'm paying attention here.
63 would be 7 letters wide. Is that what you said? Right about what you said, right?
Yes.
So let's see where 10 is. Like 10 elements wide. Well,
And then it wrapped it because it
oh,
was,
but then we also need that original 13, right?
so add
and-
so 23.
Yes, but we don't necessarily have to do that because we could do, well, the first thing's 13 elements wide plus that 12 pixels
That's
plus 67 pixels. And maybe if we wanted a little bit of a margin in there. No, something went wrong when I did that. There's a way we can do the math in there. Did I write it down here? But we need to do this math right here. What did you just say, 23? I'll just keep it there for now.
Okay.
So about that far over. It put it in like 3 columns. That's a little more than we needed. We could back off a little, maybe 19, and just go with trial and error to start with. I think I forgot something when I did the math, but it's not in the notes in front of me.
Okay.
And that is something we are going to do week 7 when we look at CSS variables.
Okay.
Really, we would save it in variables and just add the variables together.
Okay, so now we got to put a negative top number to bring it back up where we want it if we want to put it
Exactly.
level.
Top, how far? Any thoughts?
1, 2. Okay, well, let me say the 1 we had to go 4. Oh, geez. So how many lines? So an M's like a line, right?
Yeah, and sometimes
1,
it's kind of hard to tell here.
6, 7.
So maybe just, do you have a guess to start with?
I'm going to say about 10.
So 10.
10 lines. Bring the top up 10 lines. I'd bring up the top of it 10 lines and see if that works.
So bring that up 10. Oh,
Yeah.
whoops.
Yeah.
10. Whoops. Control S, not Control D. Not quite there, but it's close enough we can count now, right? Because now we can see it's only 2 more lines.
Okay.
So sometimes just make that first guess. If it's hard to see, go ahead and make a first guess, see what that guess does, and then you can adjust it from there.
Blank. Pretty close. So 11 and a half, maybe.
Yeah. And that's relative to, that's relative
to where
it started.
Where
the browser wanted to put it.
And this is why you would put in goofy backgrounds just so you could see each thing.
Yes. So that's relative positioning. Along with that, let's start pulling these back out now. Get back to that original. Well, I'm going to leave those numbers in. I'll leave it in the first one. That way we have a starting point. So there's kind of our starting point. Instead of relative, we also have absolute. And now it is just absolutely on the page, the absolute position on the page. Some people really, really love this one, and some people really dislike it. I've personally, I have found use for it before, but I try to avoid it if I can. Another thing about absolute positioning is notice when I put that, I said this is absolutely 12 pixels from the left and five lines from the top. So it is there and it's going to stay there. And once we start with absolute positioning, this is the thing I don't really care much for, is we have to stick with absolute position. Now that this thing is positioned on the page absolutely, everything else has to be positioned absolutely.
So even
Everything
if you were
after
to use fixed, it would be trumped by this absolute.
Well, the fixed would still work. So if we fix the header and we're able to scroll, so if I put, but fixed is a type of absolute, right?
Because fixed means it's,
Yeah, earlier when I showed it, it just did the very minimum right there, but we're at the very top and the very left. So it's like saying top 0 pixels, left 0 pixels. Or actually, if it's 0, we don't have to put a unit, because obviously 0 is the same everywhere. But if we move that over, so top 13 points down, left 3.4 EM.
that'll bring it over a good bit.
Brings it over, and it's fixed. So when I start scrolling, it's there. So fixed goes with absolute. Fixed is a type of absolute. Because, well, fixed is the most extreme absolute, because then no matter what else happens, when that scroll bar goes down or a horizontal scroll bar goes over, that is always absolutely in that position.
So fixed
Nothing will change it.
So fixed is automatically absolute, except that it's absolute even when you scroll.
Yes, it's the absolute that never changes. The absolute one.
It makes me think of pinning, because I do a lot with some other stuff.
With it.
You're like pin it.
Exactly. So it's scrolling up, but it's the absolute position from the start of the page, not the screen. Maybe that's the way to think of it. Absolute is fixed on the page, and fixed is fixed on the screen. And then, once we start with absolute positioning, we have to stick with it. So if I start throwing these other ones in, so like the middle one, make that absolute as well. And from the left, I guess I could have kept these numbers up here. 123 pixels over. Let's see where that puts it. So just a little ways over, probably needs to go further than that. I'll move this one to this side. There we go. So somewhere to the left of that, notice the thing's just falling in behind it. This last one, well, when I didn't say how far from the top it was, notice the absolute kind of lined it up automatically. The last instruction it had with the top, it kept. That's what some people really like about the absolute, is it got to this middle one. There was an instruction for the left, but there was no instruction on what to do with the top of it. So it kept the previous instruction it had for the top. I'll set this for absolute positioning. Well, I'll go the other way. From the right, let's say 234 pixels. I think there's room for that like it is. So it came over so many pixels. So this right side came over so many pixels. But notice what happened with the footer.
Yeah, I saw your footer suddenly decided, well, I know I could sneak myself here and there here. So it kind of.
Yeah, so the footer thinks there's nothing above it. So because once we put absolute positioning, everything afterwards has to have absolute positioning as well. Otherwise, it's going to think there's not anything above it.
So you would absolutely position the footer too.
Yes. And then, yeah, what I don't like about it is if I maximize this, it looks like a completely different page now, right?
Yeah.
Because both of these were positioned from the left and this one was positioned from the right. So it does something different and it slowly changes. We can see that moving. I guess that could be used to a nice effect. But it's
Weird.
there are definitely places for it, right? Sometimes we do want something to look exactly that way, no matter what the screen size is, no matter what resolution it is on what device, we want it to look an exact certain way. That's when you'd want to use absolute positioning.
Wow, I was wondering because I have a website before I started this class, which now I'm going to build myself. But from the your desktop, it looks a certain way, and images are like cut off. Some of that. I mean, I don't know
So
if
there's
it's the
probably
right thing.
positions that way. Yeah, absolute positioning. It was
I
just
don't
like
think
it's here on the page.
So on that one, I needed to take it off then, the absolute positioning, because when you look at it on your phone, it wasn't, it was, the photos were cut, like some of it was cut, and I had to go back in and like make them like landscape just so that even though they look smaller on the screen, on the desktop, they at least fit on the phone. So I had to just kind of mess with it to make it work instead of doing what you're saying.
That's what we'll be looking at Wednesday. So there's another type of positioning, a new one. This one, flex and grid. Those are really nice. I want to spend a little bit of time with those because they're very dynamic. And yeah, I want to spend a couple hours with those. But also on Wednesdays, we're going to look at media queries where we ask the computer how big the screen is. So like we write our CSS rules, and then before we start applying those rules, the server's going to ask the machines like, okay, is this what type of device is this? Like, oh, you're a phone, then you get these style rules. Or you're a desktop, then you get this different set of style rules. So we're going to see that on Wednesday. That'll go really quick. So we can adjust for different things.
Absolute, like Joe said, so we can see. Are
Yes.
you gonna? Oh, I was trying to move your little sliding bar with my little grabber hand. Thank you.
Position absolute. And then it would probably need to come down from the top, right? So from the top, how many lines is that? 20 lines down.
Because as far as that's concerned, since it's the only thing that's not fixed, it really is at the top. Because anything else, okay.
Yeah, since it's not absolute, it couldn't tell there was anything above it. It couldn't tell there was anything above it until it got all the way up to the header, because the header was the last thing that was not absolute.
So can you position it absolutely at the bottom of the page?
Yes, like way down here.
Yeah.
But way down there. It'll probably want to adjust the size and the margins and stuff so that it's kind of centered.
But you still absolutely position it from the top.
Yes.
You can't say position, an absolute bottom.
Oh yeah, could.
5 lines from the bottom.
Well, actually, that might be a little bit of a.
I'm just curious.
Let's see what
I'd like to see that too, because
there is a bottom thing, but since this won't be the absolute bottom of the page, it's gonna kind of make it. I'll come 5 lines from the bottom.
I mean, because honestly, the top and the bottom are the same right now, because that footer was the only thing that was on the page, right? So it really was the top and the bottom.
Yeah. So it just kind of put it in a weird spot.
Yeah.
So there is a bottom, but yeah, where the computer thinks is the bottom is definitely not the bottom of the page.
No.
Computers are not intelligent, so you definitely have to watch that stuff.
At this point, I think the only thing it's looking at is the margins, because if those other things are fixed and absolute, and if that's not, it's kind of like free, data just floating around on the page. And it looks like when it jumped to the top, that it became the first piece of data on this page, and then the margins are set to that.
Is there a height on here? Yeah, I have no idea why the computer thinks this is the bottom of the page, but it's 2 pixels from the bottom. So this is where the computer thinks is the bottom of the page. So if it's the very bottom thing, that it gets a little funny. If there is stuff below it, like a footer, that you know will be below it, then it'll be a little more accurate to measure from the bottom. But if it, yeah, if the bottom could be somewhat dynamic, it gets
So
a
it
little
sounds
funny.
like absolute's not so absolute.
Wait, actually, I think I know why that would, what that needs. Let's try making this 30% wide. It might be looking at this. Yep, there's why. So now with that wide enough to fit the words, so it didn't notice the words there was word wrap. So now it's 2 pixels from the bottom of where that bottom line should be. That makes sense? So,
Yeah, I guess.
So 30%, these words aren't getting wrapped. And they all fit on there nicely. So the computer knows there's that many lines. But whenever this was 20% wide, there's not enough room to fit those words. So if we look at about this much space between this section and the thing, that's still the same. It's still about the same depth down. So what the browser didn't realize these words were getting wrapped, and that added a whole lot of lines. Does that make sense, Joe?
Yeah.
So yeah, sometimes it takes a little bit of.
So absolute's not so absolute.
Exactly. Yeah, it
It
still
somewhat
takes.
looks like anything that's absolute does not come into the equation as far as everything else goes, as far as where everything's placed, because that stuff is there no matter what. No matter what you do this page, it's there. And then
So if there's no word wrapping or anything, it looks like this bottom lined up with the bottom line. But whenever
so I
those
can't put, let's see, you just went to 0, which brought it down pretty close.
Yeah.
So
0 pixels.
Can you have a negative?
Yes.
Bottom minus 10, minus 20. See what minus 20 does. Minus 20 might put it behind, pretty close to the. Well, now it's
20 pixels. That lined it up with that font. So probably need to go look. 20 points is probably what you were thinking of.
Well, or
you're used to looking at text, probably thinking about points like that.
Yeah.
Now they are perfectly lined up.
Now, if I wanted it really below it, then I'd have to go
30, 40.
40.
I'll put 50.
50 sounds like a nice number.
A ways down there, yeah. That's not quite below it, but get in there. So it takes a little trial and error, because what we see might not be what the computer thinks is happening, right?
Right.
Like it didn't notice that word wrap, because a word wrap is only a visual thing at the end. So the CPU had no idea that those words had to wrap. When they finished processing them and sent them there, the browser wrapped the words afterwards. And the CPU didn't recalculate sizes based on word wrapping.
So the CPU is just looking at how many line breaks it's got. So if I have a long sentence, it's going to totally screw the thing up. Because it's not expecting any line breaks. It just thinks the sentence goes off into Never Land.
Yeah, and screwed up is relative, because sometimes those are really nice, right? Like Bob Ross said, the happy little accidents. Sometimes we find the best things that way, because we'll do what we think was going to happen, and it's not what we thought was going to happen, but it'll end up looking really, really good on the page. Because of that interaction, all that interaction. And
Tiv's I'm looking at Tiv, and Tiv's losing.
Happy accident.
Yeah, after I've done that, I'm like, well, you know, with Bob Ross, I was laughing about that, but you know, where sometimes your code works and you don't know how it worked, and you're like, I'm not going to touch it.
As long as it works.
I ain't touching it. Now, on the other hand, you do it exactly right, and that's weird.
Yeah, It takes a little bit of finessing. Computers don't process in the same way that we think. So what we think doesn't necessarily mean that's what what we think the processor is going to do isn't necessarily what the processor is going to do.
And that includes the author of our book. Speaking of which, is it about time for those of us who were stuck with the previous edition to start trying to find chapter 12 or 7 somewhere?
Oh, yes. Chapter 7.
Yeah. I haven't even looked to see whether we can look at that thing for 14 days for free and look real quick and.
Yeah, give that a try. So if you have the version 7, give that a try. And if not, we'll
come up with
something. I will find a way to get you that. It's really only half of chapter 7, but I'll find a way to get it to you.
Yeah, it's the half that's graded, right?
Well, it's actually the Flex and Grid. Those are only a couple years old. They're really, really nice. We're going to look at those Wednesday. So we're going to talk about that stuff Wednesday, no matter what. And it replaced some. It always struck me as odd. Some theorem type stuff on what the best responsive window.
Okay.
Best way to do responsiveness is.
But I'm taking it that our yoga studio project will be different because it's in the latest edition.
Oh yes. Yeah, because it's probably going to use Flex.
Oh, so we might not have some of the pictures we need because I know they changed the pictures around.
Yeah. So check now to see if you can get that 14-day trial.
I'll check that as soon as we're done with class, and I'll let you know.
Yeah. If
hang on for a minute.
I will find a way to get you the pertinent information and the changes in the questions before then.
Right. That sounds like a winner.
Because it's only half a textbook, and you bought a textbook, so the company.
Well, the state of Indiana bought a textbook. Let's give our governor credit. He bought me a textbook.
Yeah, they are.
Thank you, Mr. Governor.
Those programs are pretty nice.
Governor Holcomb. That's him, Governor Holcomb.
Oh, speaking of that, do I need to sign paperwork for any of y'all?
No.
Always before, when it was in the classroom, I had to sign paperwork for week midterm and final.
I don't know. Nobody's asked me for anything yet. They congratulated me on passing my classes last time and sent me something. I don't know what it is. So,
okay, I wasn't sure what was going on because always before those programs, when it was in the classroom at midterm and final, they actually wanted the teacher's signature on a piece of paper, but it's kind of hard to actually sign a piece of paper these days. So, I guess they just kind of let that one drop.
I don't know. Don't ask me.
Hey, they're trying to social distance around here.
Yeah.
Hey, I mean, it's a neat program. Also, you get this crap in the mail. It's like, I wonder what these books are for. Oh, I better start reading them. Oh, I don't need them for a while. Oh, I don't need them at all. Okay. I mean, Loida says we could send back the textbooks. I said, to who? It's like,
you're in the PHP class after this, right?
Right.
Well, we will definitely use the PHP one. Because after this evening, we're using that book a lot.
I think they sent me 2 copies of it.
Oh, you don't need 2 copies. One's plenty.
I can barely read one of them. I tried. I didn't know what was coming next. I got all these books in the mail and all these time, and I said, well, I don't know which book's coming first. So I read a little each one and got totally confused.
Okay, yeah. So after class, check and see if you can do the 14-day trial on it, or anybody else. If you just need a copy of that, let me know.
I'll let you know. I'll holler at you. I'll do it as soon as we're done.
Because it's only the one chapter, and the state of Indiana pays for that book. So, the publisher was paid for it. So I don't know if we need to get it to you, take screenshots or something, copy and paste. I'll get the information to you all if you can't.
Okay.
If anybody's already used the online one, we'll figure something out. But check before. Let me know.
I'll let you know today.
Probably before Wednesday.
I'll let you know today. I'll let you know as soon as we're done. I'll go play with it.
That works. And if anybody else is doing that same thing, needs people watching the video that aren't here right now, send me an email. let me know
What
whether
the
you can
heck?
get that or not, and I will
What
find.
the heck? We'll just
will-
look. We'll just look right now while I'm listening to you. I can listen. I can listen and play at the same time.
Oh yeah, so that was most of what I was going to show, because I'm going to put off the grid and flex until Wednesday, because those are new. They're really nice, a whole lot better than these other ones we looked at today.
Oh God.
But we're still going to want to use these. So there's some advantages, and these take a lot more playing around with. That's another thing. The flex and grid are much more intuitive. Okay. Just let me know about the book. We'll find a way to get you that information. The only difference with chapter 7.
Pearson Ravel. I'm just clicking on it now. I'm clicking on it now. It says open Pearson to see your content. Let me see what this says. Hang on.
So just a quick note here on the absolute positioning. I guess I wrote a pro-con list in the notes. I mean, a big pro is it will always look exactly the same. So that's when you want to use it. When you always want the page to look a very specific way. The con is it's not responsive to changes, right? If I make the page bigger, it does something completely different. Those are the two big points about that. It's like we know where everything's going to go. That's often a good point. And the big thing the reason I try to avoid it is that what I pointed out, once you start using absolute positioning, everything after that has to have absolute positioning, or it won't see the stuff above it. It'll just go behind it, way up at the top. So once you start with it, you have to stick with it.
So with that being said, with what was it, the footer? Okay, let's say you added in this one, you added the absolute positioning to footer, and then let's say we
moved it
took
way
it
down.
away from something else, then the footer, then whatever something else would fall below the footer or on top. Which one?
It depends
Well,
on
I
the
guess it would fall.
situation.
And
Like move something
what'd you
up
put
here,
as far as the
or put something
I
after
guess
the
the
footer.
footer's not a good example because the footer always ends up on the bottom anyway, but just another section, if you had absolute positioning for the footer, and then let's just say we expected something else to fall right above footer, it jumped to the very top if it wasn't using the same situation. It jumped all the way to the top.
So I'll put an article here. Above the footer or below it?
Above, but without absolute positioning.
The article tag. So when I reload that, you can kind of see the T, a little bit of the T showed up right there. So it's
Okay.
is way up here at the top. Maybe that's enough to see. So reload that. Yeah, we can kind of see the words are showing up behind there. So yeah, without absolute positioning, it doesn't see any of the things that have absolute positioning. So it goes behind them all the way at the top, which you can also use as an advantage because you can position some things absolutely and let other stuff float freely around the page. As long as, if they're floated, like one's to the left and one's at the right of it, they wouldn't get behind each other necessarily, or use the Z index to move stuff. But it's definitely one to mess around with, which is what I have on the last page. It's something to play around with, so that's why I wanted to make sure there was lots of lab time today. We're scheduled for 4:50, so we can call this lab time, and it's just you're going to want to go in and try these things. And remember, there's the W3 Schools has that little test site. That way you don't have to keep writing the HTML page. So if you go to W3 Schools and check like the CSS reference, eventually the browser will get there. There it is. So if you go to the CSS reference.
3-day temporary access.
3 days.
3 days. That's not going to cut it very well, boss.
Okay, I will get that information to you.
Control-C,
I'll have it by
Control-V.
Wednesday.
Unless you want to pony up $70.
Yeah, I will get that information to
I
you.
am
Since you
not going. I'm not gonna do that. Sorry.
yeah, that's the reason the state bought you all of those books.
Right.
Okay, so way down here on the CSS reference, we see position. So if you go in there, remember this is a great little test environment. Once this loads, there's the try it yourself button. So when you hit the try it yourself button, you have a little bit of HTML code and some CSS that you can just kind of adjust and move things around and see what happens. A little editor right there in live time where there's some code already written. But really you want to do kind of like I did. I'd recommend what I did in class here. I mean, just some random words and different things, maybe put borders on them so you get, or background colors, something so you can see what's what, and then just move it around the page and try the different ones and see what you like, because it really comes down to personal style and personal preference, the ones that you like, the ones you think work the best or easiest to work with. But we do mix and match them. It's just like our sizing, right? Got stuff up here in pixels, percents, points, EMs. So lots of different sizes are being used here at the same time. So you want to probably get a feel for mixing them. And what time is it? 3:30. So that leaves us an hour and a half for lab. So that's a lot of time to just experiment around with this stuff, right? Start putting things together. Like everybody that turned in their project proposal, you kind of have an outline there for what you want that project page to look like. So even if it's just random words, right? Just some random words on the page, and start some words that you can ignore while you look at the colors and positions, and start seeing what CSS needs to get there before you put your actual data in. Just a suggestion, but it does take a little bit of messing around with and getting a feel for. So why don't we go ahead and break off for lab time. And then on Wednesday, there's two new ones, Flex and Grid, which a lot of people find a lot more intuitive to work with. They have some very big advantages, and they don't have to stand on their own. We can mix and match them with these. The ones we looked at today take a little bit more practice and getting used to. That's why they made the Flex and Grid improvements. And then also on Wednesday, we will look at the media queries, which is checking the screen size before we do something on it. We'll see how to do that, and probably print a page as well, because we can do a media query to see if somebody hits the print button. Because a lot of times there's stuff that we don't necessarily need to print, or we might need to print things that aren't showing, right? Because usually if it's on the website, there's that little blue link that we can click and it'll go somewhere. But the words that are written in blue that we can click on might not necessarily be the URL of that website. And if you hit print and all you see is that there's a link there, it's a little frustrating when you can't get to that link if you see it on a page or something.
We can show us too, like if we did, like, let's just say, I think Sabrina said she was doing like an online store. Her customers may want that tracking information or anything about the specific order that they placed, where you would be able to say print this screen, but sometimes when it prints out, it's an actual receipt different than what. Yes. So
a separate printing. When you started to say tracking, that's so tracking would be something we embedded from like UPS.
But that receipt would give them that tracking information that they can then, like, here's your tracking number that they could use and go to, whatever. Okay.
And we'll look at embedding external things next week. So we'll see that in a lot of detail. Okay, and I will figure out a way to get the contents of chapter 7 to everybody, because that's the only thing that was different in the book. So all the people for the Work 1 alignment grant, Workforce 1 alignment grant would whichever one it is these days. Seems like the name changes every couple of years. But yeah, on the workforce alignment grant, I think you all have the old textbooks and several other people might as well. So I will get you the chapter 7, which is the only thing different in the book. I'll try a couple things and figure out what the best way to do that is and send that out shortly. Otherwise, let's go ahead and split off into lab time so we can mess around with this stuff and see what's going on. Did anybody have any questions before we do that? Okay,
No.
so if nobody has any questions,
Not at the moment.
we'll go ahead. And as usual, I will keep my video set up here in my gym so that I can jump back on here in a couple seconds. Otherwise, everybody have a great day, and I will see you Wednesday.
You too. Thank you.